I am sure that when we put our minds to it, there is no reason for a circular economy to not be real and simple at the end of the day.
Hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? There are times in our lives when we meet a person who impresses us so much that we are in awe and await the change they will bring. Peter Wells, the CEO of Temperpack, is one such person. Peter's background in architecture and significant sized projects positions him well to be able to execute. His long experience with sustainable energy drives his mission for contributing towards regeneration. I am so impressed by the board of Temperpack for bringing him in. An industry outsider can be a huge boon as he comes with a freshness of perspective and lesser baggage. Temperpack is definitely in great hands. This is a delightful conversation that leads to me finding a friend. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Hello. I'm so happy today to have Peter Wells, the CEO of Temperpack. So Peter, you may not know this, but we've been excited about Temperpack for a while because it's one of those companies that's making a real impact on the sustainable packaging space. And I met Joe Rake, I think it was earlier, maybe sometime last year in one of the conferences, one of the exhibitions. And he took me through everything you guys were doing, and it was so exciting. So I'm so happy to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I know that you haven't spent so much time in the sustainable packaging industry, but I'm sure you had your influences as you were growing up in terms of the ecology, the environment. To talk to us about growing up and, what were things that really drove your thinking that enabled you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Ben. So you're right. I haven't really had the straight path to sustainable packaging. It's taken me 30 years to get here. So, so I guess I've evolved over time, but you may be able to tell from my accent that I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in England, and England, I think, is an interesting country because it's so tiny, and yet it had such a big influence globally. And so some of it good, some of it bad, I would say. But what underpins it, I think, is this deep desire for adventure and trade. And I think that's really what fueled England's history. And so I think when you grow up in a country like that, it becomes an inevitable part of your persona. And so growing up, we were always traveling and going overseas. And even with college and then work, my job often took me out. I've lived in a few different places now. And I think that curiosity leads you to really enjoying going to different places, really enjoying the diversity of what's out there. And I think you also then recognize how fragile it all is at the end of the day. And so I think my awareness of the seriousness, let's say, of the situation that we're in has grown over time, but it's always born out of that desire to travel and meet and understand and enjoy and not try to change, and just learn from it because it just makes life really rich. And I think we're facing a time where it's quite sad in a way. We're losing so much. So I think there was always that element of awareness of just how important what we have on our doorstep is, and to want to be, I guess, part of doing something positive for that. So my career has taken me, it's evolved and it's taken me in a few different ways into sustainability. And I've probably been in sustainability for 15 years now, and I wouldn't do anything else, Ben, to be honest with you. So
that's brilliant.
But I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
There are no absolute answers. So whatever, as my oldest daughter says, whatever sprinkles your donut.
I like it. And you live in a good place for donuts, let's be honest.
That is true. Whereabouts in England did you grow up?
I grew up in Warwickshire, so just north of Oxford, just south of
Okay.
Birmingham. Yeah,
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 that's amazing because if somebody was to ask me, I was thinking about this as you were speaking, if somebody was to ask me what influenced me, it was actually a survival camp that I did when I was 16, north of Scotland, north of Inverness, in a small island called Ardmore. I would say that really sowed the seeds
yeah,
of
yeah,
this, exactly what you were saying, the fragility of the planet and the beauty of the planet as
yeah,
well. And, and then I think it's just from there it's kind of taken its own life and
yeah,
evolved in many ways. And of course, as you were talking about England, another kind of joke that came to my mind is that England has actually given so many countries a holiday, which is Independence Day. So, so many Independence Day
yes.
caused because
It's
of
so
England.
true. It's so true. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but
It's a mix. It's a mixed bag, isn't it? The
yeah,
history is a mixed bag, but we can't do anything about that.
yeah,
But I
that's
do
gone.
think it's yeah, it's gone. But it is. It is. I often find it completely almost unimaginable, like how a tiny little country
It's
did
amazing.
so much. It's really incredible. Yeah, yeah.
No, and
But
I grew up in the Indian
yeah,
mountains, so there's such
right.
an influence, and actually, in a way, so creditable that there's so many stories in the Indian Himalayas of this lone. It probably was a Scotsman though, but a lone, lone British person coming on a
Yeah,
horse and finding this place overlooking these mountains and creating this bungalow,
it's
and
crazy.
now it's some kind of homestay and stuff like that. And there are
Yeah,
really, of course, you can say as many negative things as possible, but there are also
yeah,
these crazy adventures that you come
yeah,
through, and that's
yeah.
probably in the blood and in the spirit of England.
Yeah, that desire for adventure, and of course, everything. It was all a big part of it was trade, wasn't it? And it's interesting, when you think about the world we live in. Again, it's almost baffling, right? We've created massive economies around the movement of goods and people. Everything's about the movement of goods and people, and we've become so global, and everything goes everywhere, which is also another risk, right, for how you protect the diversity of what's out there because everything's getting homogenized. So it's like, how do you protect that? But of course, that's where our story comes in too, right, with packaging, because
Yeah.
all of that movement it needs to be looked after properly, and so it's interesting.
And
But,
definitely, if you come to the United States, then it's so homogenized. And I think,
it is,
in a way, England has still
yeah,
got these special fish and chip shops in every area. It's not
yes,
a, it's the chains are not as popular as the individual kind of shops, but the
this is
United
true.
States is of course different. So you're
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so right about this.
yeah,
So I'm gonna move gears, and so
yeah.
it's a very interesting degree that you did, and I have no idea what it is. Quantity surveying, and I was trying to figure it out. I should have Googled it. I
Oh
didn't,
wow.
but I was making my own assumptions, which is
Yeah.
dangerous. So talk to us about that. Why that degree, and how did that impact you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it does sound like an odd degree, doesn't it? It's one that gets made fun of, I can assure you. But it's all to do with building and development and planning and construction, and it actually has a lot of history. It goes back to, I think it's Christopher. I think it's Wren, the guy that designed and built St Paul's Cathedral in London. So its origins were people like him doing these massive projects, and they had no idea really, like, how long is it going to take and how much material do I need of what. So the whole concept of quantity surveying was a profession that was developed to support architects and engineers to to specifically measure all of the different quantities and to help them with the planning. And it evolved over the years, of course, and it's become something that's very much about project management and construction management. Typically speaking, now QSs, as we would call it, are often the people running and leading projects. It's very commercial, and I would tell you that my first love is kind of interesting, really, but my first love was really design, and I loved woodwork, and I loved furniture, making furniture, and I loved architecture, and I often think back to it, Ved, that I probably was given horribly misleading careers advice at school. And I remember speaking to the careers. He was the deputy headmaster, and he was also giving careers advice to people going, 18-year-olds going to college. Um, and I told him I wanted to be an architect, and he told me, like, he said, Peter, no, no, it's not going to happen. You're not, you're not doing the right A
Oh,
levels,
wow.
and you'll never get in. so, and
So
then he had
encouraging.
yes, exactly. Right. I think back to it. I think how horrific because, yeah, he gave me a leaflet and said, "Here's just so happened. Here's one on quantity surveying. That seems like a good fit for you." And so I was a bit crestfallen, as you can imagine. And so I didn't actually pursue it straight away. When I left school, I did a couple of smaller jobs before realizing I really did need to go to college, that was the obvious thing to now go do. Because it was close to kind of what I had dreamt of doing. Reflecting on it, of course, which is where I think it's horrific, is what would it have taken to get ready to go to an architectural school that I wanted a year, 2 years? I worked for 2 years anyway before I went to college. You know what I mean? So it's just like I look back and I think, what a horrific piece of bad advice. So one day, I've never forgotten it. One day, I've decided that when I have time, I am going to go get a degree in architecture.
Wow, you must, if
I
that's
will.
on your mind.
I will. So yeah, so
I have to,
that's how it began, and that's why I ended up
I,
doing it.
I have to at some point, and you'll enjoy this one. I have to at some point introduce you to one of my very, very dear friends and mentors, somebody who's influenced me significantly. And you probably read his writing. And he was actually the first guest on this show. He actually made me take off the show. A guy called Bill McDonough, who has written Cradle to Cradle. It's a
Yeah,
seminal text in the sustainability space. And he's an architect. So he comes from that
ah,
architecture space
yeah, yeah.
into materials, and that's how
Oh,
his journey
interesting.
became.
Yeah,
It's all, how do I use better materials to make buildings, and how do I lower the impact? And
great.
that took him on his own
Yeah,
journey. But you would love speaking to him and seeing what he makes, because it's
that
really
would be great.
interesting. And he,
Yeah.
and he does. The good thing is that he does like to share openly about what he's doing. So it's very, very gracious and generous with his thinking.
That's awesome. It's funny, because it still strikes me a lot when I look at design, building design, especially residential. That there's so much that we don't do that we could on sustainability. It's amazing, really. And I don't know if it's a cost driver or just plain laziness. I don't know what it is, but when you look at how new houses are designed and built, it just seems to me that we could be way better in terms of efficiency and materials and sustainability. But anyway, that's the next career.
No, no, but I
We'll
think
park
it's an
it for now.
important one.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
because I also think of it from another perspective, and I've met some really great designers, and I think, buildings last forever in many ways. And then the great designers that I've met don't talk to you about the building. They talk to you about what are you trying to create in terms of. So one of the people, we run a few schools in India, and the architect there is all about, it's called building as a learning aid. So the building is to
Mm,
enhance the learning of every child, and it has to be age appropriate. And then so
mm,
the idea is that how do you design to enhance that creativity? Every nook and cranny, it's just simple things like opening of doors, you just mark the angles. So the child automatically is learning through that angle. If it's a
hmm.
pillar, you make it a life cycle. So it's just those little things. But it's also about, another example that comes to my mind is that we were creating one building, and he said that, what are you trying to create? What is the feeling that you want? He said,
Mm,
we want
hmm.
community. This is a people living together, and but we were going to create like a straight, like a English row house, a straight block. And he said, you won't create a community that way. He said, all you need to do it is make it into a U. So when you make it into a U, people are looking into each other. And he's so right. Years down, I see the interactions with places where there are row houses versus where there is like a U. It's just a
Yeah,
simple difference,
yeah.
right? So I know we are digressing, but
It's
but it's
but
an
it's
interesting
really
digression.
interesting. It is. It's really
It's
interesting. It's
fascinating.
very cool. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to your career after the
yeah.
non-architecture career, which is a long time with.
I did it. Yeah, it's so funny, and I did it for a while. I came out of college, and it's like a lot of those degrees. You do your professional training and your exams, and you get the letters behind your name. And so I became a chartered surveyor, and I did it for probably almost a decade. Big projects, the Channel Tunnel project, big stuff like that. When I came out of college, so it was really interesting. I worked on for about a year on at the time it was the new airport in Hong Kong, which was an island they built to build the airport, which was also pretty crazy. But
Wow. Yeah, that
so
is
some
crazy.
really big stuff like that, really interesting. Loved it. Lived in Belgium for a while as well as the UK, and a little bit of time in Hong Kong. But yeah, I got to a point where I think it just was wondering what would come next. I suppose it's a fairly traditional industry, and so you tend to sort of you sit on your ladder and you get told when to take the next step up. And I guess I wasn't very patient, and I was thinking, I don't know, why am I waiting for? It seems like I'm waiting for somebody to pass away so everybody can move up a notch, and it just became very frustrating and a bit depressing. And I just happened to have been working with a consultant on value and risk management. They were doing a project for GE in the US back in 2001, and they said, "Hey, do you want to go over to Atlanta for 6 months and help us on this project with GE?" It was a joint venture between the industrial group and the power systems group, and so I went and spent 6 months with them, and it was super. Yeah, had a great experience, and that's what led me to an offer from GE. And so I went back. I moved back to the States in 2002, joined GE, did a lot of the normal GE stuff. If you're familiar with GE, so a lot of great learning experiences, and spent about 10 years with them, all in energy, all in the energy space. A little bit of nuclear, a little bit of gas and steam, but mostly fossil based, like nothing renewable at that point. And then again, I hit that point that where you start to get frustrated. And it was back in 2010. I'd had some changes in my personal life and work, and I just was like, I don't know, is this what life's all about? And surely there's something else out there. And again, another contact, a friend of mine that had left GE and gone to a venture capital firm, said, "Hey, we've got this investment in a wind energy services company, independent service provider, actually in Medford, Oregon." So a little bit that was the headquarters at the time, not too far from Crater Lake up there.
That's what got you to Portland, huh?
Yeah, that was the first time I was up there, and then yeah, they reached out, and I was talking to them. They had Kleiner Perkins involved, so a lot of storied VCs, and it was just really, I don't know, it was so intoxicating for me, just to meet these people and listen to them talking about stuff. And you might like this story. So the bit that kind of sealed the deal is I'd flown out to San Francisco to meet them. I met the team. I really liked everybody, and I was in my car. I was living in North Carolina at the time on the coast, and I was in my car driving home from work one day, and the phone went, and I picked it up, and this guy says, "Hi, Peter, this is former Vice President Al Gore." And I'm like, "Yeah, right. Sure it is."
Wow.
And it
That's
was.
crazy.
It was. And he was a partner with one of these VC firms, right? And so they'd said, "Hey, give this guy a call and talk to him about sustainability." And you can imagine, right, with him, he spoke to me about why they'd invested in this company and why wind energy was so important. And I really hope, I've heard lots about you. I really hope that you join. And so they knew how to close the deal.
Absolutely.
But it was like,
That's a big one.
it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Yeah, I never forget it. So it had a big
Yeah. Had
impact
you
on me.
seen The Inconvenient Truth by then?
No, because not
Oh
at the
my
time.
gosh.
'Cause, yeah, so and I got to meet him a few times after during that. I was there for 5 years, and helping build. Well, I ended up becoming the CEO, but that wasn't the plan originally. But things changed quite quickly in the first year, and suddenly I was the CEO and thinking, what on earth am I doing? I have no idea what I'm doing. And
It's
so it
crazy.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was. Well, I'm here now, so let's go try to figure this out.
It's a
Yeah,
crazy story. But
yeah,
one of my mentors, he taught me really well, actually drilled it into me. He says there are no coincidences in life. If you think that it's all synchronicity, it's the right place at the right time. So even the quantity surveying is not a coincidence.
yeah,
It's taken
yeah,
you on a trajectory. If you look back,
yes. Oh, it all
doing projects.
connects.
Yeah, doing
Yeah,
projects. Because again, another book I was reading recently, which is fascinating. I think it's called How Big Things Get Done. And it's really all about project management, but really well written. It's not a dry book.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it
yeah.
talks about, projects that have been done really well, like even the Heathrow Terminal 5, and
Hmm.
projects that have just gone all over the map. And what is the difference? And it's fascinating. It's all about thinking slow and acting fast rather than acting fast and thinking slow.
Yeah.
Sorry, the other way,
Yeah.
thinking fast and
Yeah.
acting slow. So,
Yes.
so you know, so
Yes.
so, but with your strong background in project management, so many things can get done better. I know that we struggle so much. We are trying to, as the company I come from, we are trying to set up big projects, but to find good project managers who are trying to defy status quo. In
Mm.
fact, just earlier this week, I was at a conference and I met the former head of Tesla's project management, and it was
Okay.
fascinating, like
Yeah.
how they challenge everything. The whole idea that he talked about is Tesla doesn't use EPCs, or if they use
Mm-hmm.
them, they say
Mm-hmm.
that you're here for 8 to 9 months, we are going to learn everything, and you're out. So,
Wow.
because they said that we are not here for one project and we are not here to beef up the project, and we
Yeah.
are here to challenge that, okay, if it can be done in 4 years, how do we do it in three, then two, then one?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all about modularity and
Yeah.
standardization and getting things done ahead of time in a different place and shifting it and putting it together
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
just simple things like they said they standardized the length of the bar that was to be bolted. Everything had to be multiples of that. So imagine the production process that goes on. It's just the devil
Yeah.
is in the detail, right? So
It
it's just
is. It
fascinating how
is.
people do things. And of course, you've garnered those strengths. So, getting
I still
things
think about
done
it.
will be,
Yeah. I think you're right. It's interesting when you look back. Of course, you have no idea at the time as you do things because you cannot see into the future. But when I look back, everything seems to have rolled from one thing into another. And there are skills that you learn along the way, and you use all of them in the end. It's amazing how they all seem to think, wow, I would never have imagined that what I learned over here would be applicable even in the current role. So yeah, it is interesting. But yeah, that was back in, so 2010 was the step into sustainability, and it was a tough old journey. But that company got bought by Vestas, and they were their head office in the US is Portland in Oregon. So that's what took me back to Portland, Oregon, because I was living in San Diego at the time for the startup in wind, and yeah, so I was there for a little bit, and then GE came calling again, and had an opportunity in Europe. So I decided, yeah, we took a little time off. We ended up in Barcelona in Spain, and there was an opportunity there, and so
it's not a
I,
not a bad place to be.
it was lovely. Yeah, we enjoyed it a great deal. Lovely food, lovely wine, lovely region, beautiful mountains, coastline. It has a lot of the super positives, and a great country. Yeah, and so we were there for a little bit, and I was running the region for renewable energy and GE for wind energy. So we were doing project development. We were manufacturing the wind turbines, delivering them, installing them, commissioning them, servicing them. So it was a pretty big operation. And we had sub-Saharan Africa too. So I'd go down to South Africa a few times. Where I met some in Kenya. I mean, talk about meeting people that are massively inspirational. Um, I met so many great people in Kenya and South Africa, often people that had left to get educated in the UK or the US, and then they'd gone back and they were working on setting up housing or whatever. And it was phenomenal. I had a good time with those folks. So, um, and I got to a point that I think where again I started to miss the startup a little bit. You go from big corporate to startup and back, and you start to miss those things a little bit. And I missed that. I missed the environment of a startup where you really feel like you can have an impact. And often in big corporate, it's hard because so much is kind of structured, and you can feel frustrated. And I was definitely feeling frustrated. COVID had happened as well, an impact, I think, personally for lots of people. And so we were reflecting. My wife and I were reflecting on our lives and what to do next, and we decided to move back to the US. But I felt like with wind energy, and if you look at renewable energy in general, I don't think the problem is the generation, because I think we have a pretty good sense of how to generate renewable power. It's more now about a little bit about storage, I would say, which is, of course, a big focus for lots of people. But mostly for me, it's about the grid. It's about the transmission and distribution. It just doesn't get the right energy to the right places at the right time. And so it's archaic, and it doesn't do the job it needs to do. So I got enticed to go join a small, very small company that was doing some really, they're still trying to do some really amazing work on the grid to digitalize it and allow the grid to operate better in this new world. Everything's shifted, right? I used to tell people, it's like, imagine somebody just took your heart out. Like today, like your heart is the equivalent of a coal-powered fire station or nuclear or gas. Imagine somebody just took that out, broke it into five, and put them in all of your fingers and toes, and your body has to rewire, right, to move. That's what's happened with energy. If you think about it, the big centralized production is being phased out, and small little distributed smaller distributors is there. So it was hugely fascinating, but we ran into so many roadblocks with market design and regulation and technology adoption. So that kind of fizzled out. I knew it was going to, I knew it would just was going in a slightly difficult direction. And sometimes you reach a point with careers where you don't agree with the people around you, and it's time to move on. So I moved on, and I did some work for a group of friends that are part of a pretty successful alternative energy investment group. And then the Temperpack opportunity passed my way, and here I am.
Super.
So,
And because that's the story I want to get to. So I'm glad that you
yes,
kind of
yeah,
did the chronological kind of movement. And it's interesting that you mentioned the whole balance of energy, and I'm sure that gave you a lot of insight into different aspects of business as well, because
mm,
the consumer has to get energy, and there is so many things that you have to keep balanced in terms of generation and distribution and
mm,
everything else in between. And you ideally, there is storages being built, etc., but it's still, as you said, it's still archaic to kind of be able to
mm-hmm,
store energy in an effective way and cost
yeah,
effective way. So so those are huge challenges. And again, the conference I was talking about, there's a lot of talk around that. And now with hydrogen coming
interesting,
in, and fuel cells
yeah,
coming in, all of that,
yeah,
it's very, very interesting what's happening in that space. But let's jump to
mm,
Temperpack. So
yeah,
what attracted you to Temperpack, and how did they
mm,
convince you that you should shift entirely from, so both ways actually? How did
mm.
they convince you, and how were they convinced that you were the person? You had no
Yeah,
clue about sustainable
yeah.
packaging, paper, and all of that. So
This is
how did
true.
this
This is
marriage
true.
happen?
Yeah, this is true. Well, like with a lot of things, in the first instance, it's network, right? So it so happened that the headhunter they were using was a headhunter that I'd worked with before, both being placed by them, but also using them to help me find talent that I was looking for. And so you build relationships with people that you like and you trust. And so this opportunity came from a source that I really like and trust a great deal. And I'd actually seen it before because the same company had reached out to me to see if I knew anybody that might be interested. And at the time, it was the wrong time for me. And I was like, yeah, I said, oh, that sounds like a great company. That sounds really cool. So then when it came back up, I think that I knew that I needed to stay in sustainability because that was really important to me because we spend so much time with work. And if it doesn't have that kind of impact, why, in a way, like why bother? So that was a given. I also knew that I think having spent sort of 20 years in energy, energy felt to me like it was going in the right direction other than the grid. I still think the grid needs a huge amount of work. And I felt a bit burned out, by that experience, just a lack of utilities willing to adopt because it didn't work for their business model, even if it was better for everybody else. So it was a bit disenchanting. So
Yeah, story
um,
of our lives.
you're right. So I thought, yeah, you know what? This sounds really interesting, and so I agreed to go up and meet them. And then what happened to me was three things. Really, I got really intrigued by the space, just the industry itself, because this job is fascinating in the sense that I work at a company to support customers, and I am often the customer of my customers, as in I get deliveries at home. And often in that box is the packaging
Yeah,
that
yeah, you're
Temperpack
right.
is making. And so I thought, wow, this is kind of cool and interesting that you're B2B, but you're very close to the consumer because the consumers touch and feel our product like all the time. So I just got really intrigued by the space. I think mainly because I'd never really thought about it a great deal. other than trying to get all my recycling ready every week for pickup. Do you know what I mean? And you're always asking yourself questions like, gosh, why do we generate so much waste? And where does this all go? And what happens to it? And so I had that kind of sense for it. So this space just became very intriguing to me. And then as I looked into it, I realized how detailed and complicated it was. Do you know what I mean? It's like you tend to think, oh, it's a box and it arrives. It's like, no, especially cold chain, perishable goods that have to be protected. It is not that straightforward. You're looking at all sorts of engineering to understand, will it be in the same condition? Will the temperature have been kept below a certain threshold or not? All sorts of profiles of like, if it sits on a doorstep for 12, everything that you have to understand is incredibly complicated and way beyond anything that I'd imagined. So that became really intriguing to me. And the people I met, the founders, the leadership team, the board, obviously we rely on people in everything we do. And so that was, it's important that you like them. And I just really enjoyed the team. It just had an immediate sort of impact for me. I was like, I really like this team. And I liked the board. The board seemed to be close-knit, understanding of each other, give each other space to talk, and I'd come off an experience where the board wasn't like that. So I really wanted to make sure the board was in a different kind of place. And then impact at the end. So the first thing was the space, the second thing was the people, and then the third thing was impact. And that was twofold for me. One was the impact that the company has. And obviously, you can imagine we're avoiding CO2 emissions, we're avoiding plastics getting into the system and into the oceans and so forth. So impact there is clear. But also, we talked a little bit about my background and history and the things I've done. You also want to work somewhere you feel you can have an impact, a positive impact on the business. And it just felt to
absolutely.
me with the stage of the company, as I feel like I can help. I feel like I can do some good things for these people, right? These great people. So yeah, it was very attractive. Why me? I think it was me and one other candidate. I know that. I know that the other candidate was from the industry. And I think I had a sense of that through the process. And I think I felt I probably wouldn't get it because of that. In the end, as I understand it from the board, the deciding factor was they really wanted vision and growth and drive, and that was their. So I spend a lot of time. It's the background and the training, right? I spent ages researching, and I produced my own presentation, and I went in and I presented to the board what I thought I knew about the industry and where I thought the interesting dynamics were and areas of potential growth, and tried to demonstrate that I've really been listening to everybody, and here's what I would do. And I shared that also with the management team. I did like a little report, and I shared it with the management team of like, here's kind of what I'm thinking, because I knew they'd be very influential. It wouldn't just be the board; it would be the leadership and the founders as well. So yeah, and I got the nod. So I was so happy. I got to tell you, I love the company. I love everything they've done. I love what we're doing right now, where we are, what's in front of us. So it's been thrilling, really, to arrive somewhere that has so many good things about it, and so much potential. It's really exciting. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's an amazing insight into how it happened. And especially, I was definitely intrigued from your perspective, but also what you said about their perspective. What are they looking for? Because when we are hiring, we sometimes just focus so much on the Rolodex that, what is this person going to get? Because here they're looking at a wider picture. They're not looking at short term, clearly. They're looking at, can this person take the company to the next level? And it may take you may take 6 more months, but in the end, it's 6 months to a year. That's all that you're going to take to catch up, right, on the industry and connects and a couple of conferences, and you'll know us all, and and that's really it. Because otherwise, we get too stuck in that rather than the attitude and the persona of the person. And talking about the complications, you haven't even started yet, dude. You're looking at the Temperpack structures. I come from the pulp and paper background.
Yes.
I can tell you this, Peter, that even when we are the fibers are an oddity, and how they come together, it's really magic. And I'll just give you a little example of, we were trying to make this one grade of paper, and we needed the right softwood. The amount of research it took to go down to black spruce from the Ontario region, from the St. Felician mill. And this was just 20% of the product. The rest of it was other fibers. But how it was bonding, and how it was connecting, and
Wow.
what the cell wall
Yeah.
thickness was,
Yeah.
and how we would
Yeah.
refine it, and all of that.
Yeah.
And of course, when Joe and I were talking back in the event, then we were talking about this, that how can we create the right paper that Temperpack uses from agricultural residue, which is the primary goal. But
Yeah.
it is kind of multi, as everything else, right? The more you
It's
dig,
amazing.
the
Yeah.
the deeper it gets, and it's
It's
it's it's
amazing.
fascinating how
Yeah.
it happens. One of my gurus in paper making taught me that, think like the fiber, feel like the fiber. It's literally like the
It's
Bruce
funny.
Lee quote, like feel like water.
That's funny.
It's like feel
That's
like
funny.
feel like the
Yeah.
fiber, and you will know. It's the rest of it is common sense, because then you'll know what you feel when you're refined in a certain way, when you're
Yeah.
bonded in a certain way, when you go through a slot, and stuff like that. So it
Yeah.
was it was those, but the common sense has to come from somewhere. So it's interesting, but you will find it fascinating as you get more and more into
It's
the
great.
subject.
No, it's great. I really love it, and I think partly too that and I was reading a little bit about your background and your transition in leadership and letting go, right? Letting go and realizing, hey, I got all these great people around me, and I think that resonates with me because at the end of the day, as a CEO, it's not your job to know everything. You have like the team that I have are amazing. They're experts. Each of them are experts in their fields, so they're going to know more than me about their different areas all day long, every day, all year. And that's right. That's the way it should be. So I take tremendous comfort from being surrounded by people that are really good at what they do. And I think your job as a CEO is to enable that team at the end of the day. That's your job, is to make them as successful as possible. So I've got all the experts there to ask questions of what does this mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know if it's a good thing or not a good thing, but you know how bad I was. It just took me 15 years to realize it. 15 years of trying to be better. And then I said, okay, I need to fire this guy first. Till I
That's
have
so
this
funny.
guy, I'm not going anywhere. So
That's so funny.
that led to you, but you're
I'm
right. It
sure
just
you're I'm
changed the
sure
whole
you're being very
trajectory.
modest.
No, it's the truth.
Yeah.
But we'll have a deeper discussion over a drink sometime. The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by Pakka. Pakka has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. Pakka utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. Pakka is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@pakka.com, and Pakka is Pakka. Now, back to the show. But tell me the Temperpack story. Of course, it's
Yeah.
fascinating to see
Yeah.
how the founders, and I don't know that much about it, but
Yeah.
Brian, James, and Charles, and how did
Yeah.
they come together? Why did they think of this? Why this one domain of protective
Yeah.
and insulation kind of packaging? Because it's a very specific domain. So, how did
It
that
is.
whole story emerge? It would be great to hear from me and the listeners.
Yeah. So they're longtime friends, and they were at college together, and they noticed. This is back. They really found it around 2015, and they noticed that e-commerce was taking off, and e-commerce, especially around perishable goods, being delivered to people's homes. And at the time, really, the only thing that was being used was what, coming from the UK, I would call it polystyrene, but styrofoam, right? So, um, which has amazing properties, but of course we know it's problematic too because it's super energy intensive to make in the first instance, It is toxic, right? There's loads of research that can speak to the toxicity of what's left. Um, and we know that chemically it never breaks down, and physically, even though you try to capture it, there's all these micro sort of molecules of plastic. They will get through and they get out into the oceans, and it's very difficult to get them out if you ever can. So they get into the system, and so there was really the two trends, right? They're saying, hey, or the two elements, right? This is taking off, and there isn't a good solution. Let's say a sustainable solution that can deliver to the same level. And so they start to play around. One of them too, like I think they've got James's dad is actually quite a successful entrepreneur. And so I think they also had that sort of background of like laser focus, like understand where you can make a difference and just be laser focused. So I think that's why they went very much into that niche. Um, they looked at jute, they looked at denim, so they were looking at materials of like, hey, that's out there. How do we recycle that and reuse that? But they found that it wasn't a very good product for different reasons. And you know this well. I think that when you and it might be something we talk about of like around sustainability of like, can you win because you've got a sustainability badge? And the answer is no. Like we know that it's not good enough. You have to win on everything. So they needed to find a product that would have the quality and let's say the technical performance, the quality level, the reliability. Because if you're supplying big companies, you've got to be super reliable on delivering on time with a good quality product. Then price, and then maybe number five is it sustainable? But it's a little bit of a ways down the list. So it's great if you've got it, but everything else has to be in place first. And so in the end they came upon obviously the concept of starch, extruding starch, because they knew that foam obviously has amazing properties. It's light. You can customize the shape of it. Like if you look at starch, when you extrude it, I can do so many different things with it. I can form different shapes. I can brand it. I can do different things. It's light. The thermal properties are really strong. So there's all of these attributes, if you will, that lend itself. And then they just went through a whole bunch of evolutions, and it's a company. I often debate a little bit with the team. Are you at your core? Are you the single-use sustainable insulation cold chain experts? Is that your badge of honor? Or is it really that you have deep expertise in material science, process engineering, right? Packaging engineering, like those skill sets, that deep expertise, that's what allowed you to be great in that particular niche. You could apply that in other areas too, right? At the end of the day, but it's that marriage of these skill sets. Because if you look at what we do, there's nothing like that. If you came into our production facility, nothing really is off the shelf. Everything's bespoke, right? Even if they found a machine that did something they wanted, they had to modify it and adapt it to the purpose of what they were trying to achieve. So it's a pretty amazing, like when you look at all of the capability and the know-how, the trade secrets, the IP, it's all about the process, the machines, the materials, the recipes, like everything. It's a blended bunch of skill sets and expertise that come together. And they've had quite the journey, right? At the end of the day, it's quite the journey. But I'm sure you said you've been following, but COVID was a huge boost. Then you've had the sort of the hangover of COVID, if you will. And obviously a lot of our customers have been through the ups and downs of that too. And so I think we've been lucky. We've come together with a great product, and we've pushed our way through those ups and downs, and we've had year-over-year growth. And we're in a good spot at the moment.
And there are so many things that are actually deeply intriguing and fascinating about what you were talking about, starting from, you're absolutely right, when you're sitting in front of a customer, everything else being equal in terms of performance, price, etc. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
sustainability will win,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
everything else, you can't
yep,
compromise on performance for sure.
yep,
And
yeah,
ideally, the cost ballpark also has to be near enough, even if
yeah,
it's like maybe
yeah.
I find that sweet spots can be up to 20%, but
Mm,
that's the upper
hmm.
limit. And beyond
Yeah,
that, nobody's willing to kind of spend for sustainability. And even there, it would be the odd, crazy company that is going to do
yeah,
do what.
yeah.
Um, the other one which you mentioned, and it's again really fascinating, is this laser sharp focus, because this is
Mm,
where tend to dissipate, because it's a narrow space, but there is a lot to be done out there. And
yeah, yeah.
especially, and I'm going to ask you this question because I see this a lot with startups, because they're all trying, right?
Mm,
And and I find that they end up dissipating energy in so many directions and then go nowhere. So, what was it apart from James's dad? What was it in them that basically made them stick their guns to, okay, no, we're going to perfect this first. And yes, you're right. You can go into other things subsequently, and you can look at it yourself as a material science company. But the starting point is
yeah,
very solid then. So, what
yeah.
was that kept them stuck to this area?
Well, I'd be speaking on their behalf, so it would be a great question to pose to them. But my guess that is that if you go back to the point in time where they really figured out Climacell, and obviously we have three product lines, right? Which you'll know we have the Climacell one, we have Green Cell Foam, and we have the Wavecraft. So, but they all had sort of focus in the same area with different attributes. So they complement and play slightly differently. But once they'd found very high quality product, great consumer look and feel too, right? You open the box and it just looks good and it feels good, which I think is really important to consumers. And it does its job. It protects in the right way, and it's got all the sustainability elements too, which we get consumers write to us all the time. So I think they knew they were in a good place for good product. And then with COVID, the direct to consumer industry just took off like crazy. And so for quite a while there, you know, 2020, 21, it was, I think, it was all they could do to keep up. So I can't imagine like in that world where you can barely keep up that there's not much conversation about what else should we do. Right? It's my guess because
That's
you're just like, how much do they want? So you're in
yeah,
that sort of, they're
that's
just
a
trying
good
to go, go,
that's a
go. I mean, we've probably got quite a bit of work to do on our systems and everything to get those caught up with where we are. Um, but yeah, I think it was just about keeping up. It was about keeping up and then
yeah.
investing like crazy to keep up. And of course, if you recall back in for sure 21, I think the whole spec, all of this sort of back and going public was very, very popular. And lots of companies really off of that kind of growth trajectory were going out and being valued over $1 billion. And so there was huge interest at the time of taking Temperpack public. And so there was a big ramp and everything getting ready. And then everything went the other way. We come out of COVID, nobody wants to do a spec anymore because the redemption rates are so high. And yeah, so they had to pivot again. And I think that was tough. 22 into 23 was a tough pivot, and this isn't working. And really hunker down, look at the cost structure, make some tough decisions. And when I joined, we were just really in that sort of the midst of coming out of that sort of like plan, and it worked very well. So we had a really strong 23, and now we face into that next phase again, right? Which is what do you do? We're definitely one of the larger players in our space for sure, um, and we obviously have investors who want us to keep growing, and we have employees who love the impact, all of the metric tons of plastics we avoid, and metric tons of carbon emissions that we avoid, right, with our products. So there's loads of great stuff for us to go after. But yeah, this is a big question for me in particular, of course, and the team, the leadership team, and the board. Where what's next? We have good ideas, I think, but it is a challenge. It's an interesting
Super.
challenge. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your, I like the answer to that. Stick to your knitting. When you have too many orders, you can't look here and there. You're
yeah,
just kind of
no
hunker
time.
down and make sure you deliver. And I think that's a good reason. I would not have thought of
Yeah,
that reason. Also, just another connected question, maybe from a more personal perspective. And like you mentioned, I took 15 years to kind of realize that I should be in operations. How come Brian, James, and Charles were much smarter, and they realized. I know that
Yeah,
Brian was the CEO for a while,
yeah.
and I don't know how they played their roles, and they realized that they shouldn't be running the show. And how did
It's
that? Do you know
interesting.
how that came about?
I know. Well, I felt a few evolutions. At one point, all three of them were CEOs, and I think they realized that that didn't make sense. Uh, Out of the three of them, James and Charles are the engineers, if you will. And it's almost like if I put it in my building world, like James is like the architect and Charles is the engineer. Like James is the creative spirit, and Charles is like, yeah, I'll figure out how to make it. Um, and Brian's the business guy, right? So Brian comes from more of the finance background. And so I think in the end, when they said, "Look, it doesn't make sense. We can't all be the CEO," it was a logical choice. There was Brian, and then Brian with when he did the raise back in 22, I think he felt it was time to step away. He had other things he wanted to go do, and he moved actually to the West Coast. Um, Stayed on the board, so I spend a lot of time with him still. Um, and I think at that point they had a very senior, experienced leader that was already advising, who sort of said, "I'll step in and help you, to take the CEO reins for a period of time." Um, and then there's a question of what did James and Charles do, and so I think they naturally aligned with sort of Charles going into being the chief technology officer because that it just really fits his mindset and capability set, and James more on the chief product officer side, meaning more not I wouldn't say your traditional like stage gate management, but very much ideation, creation, thinking about ideas, testing them. How could we do this? What about that? But again, very sort of focused in on solving problems, understanding problems and solving problems. So I think they figured out what they liked. Um, the one thing that I really commend them on though is it's I've I've had experiences before when you come in and let's say you're the professional CEO like this being hired to come in. Um, Founders are not always the easiest to connect with, and it can be a good experience or a bad experience. And for these three, I think they're grounded and sort of pragmatic approach to what's my role now, which must be very difficult as you 4 rounds of raising money, your position's changing, and honestly, at the end of a Series D, it's not your company anymore. So I mean, it's not because it's all this other money's in there, and it's their company. So mentally, how you work your way through that process and still engage in a positive, active way is not the easiest thing in the world, and I think they've done it very well. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's been a
kudos to
pleasure.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
tough one to go through,
Yeah.
especially if you've created your baby and then
Right.
letting it
You gotta
go
let go a
is
little bit.
yeah,
It's hard.
yeah.
It's really hard. But they've yeah. Full credit to them. They've done it really well, and it's been a real pleasure for me. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, you mentioned this, and let's move towards products. And mentioned the three products. I'm
Yeah.
relatively familiar with them, but of course,
Hmm.
on the podcast, it'll be good to hear about the Green Cell, Wavecraft, and the Climate Cell. And I know that I think Green Cell, you guys acquired another company.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
just tell us a little more about the differences in the products that Temperpack is doing now, and how the application differs as well.
Yeah. So the climate cell obviously is the sort of original, and it's really our larger product line in the sense that it's the majority, and that is a product that, as I mentioned, it's starch based. So we extrude starch. We cut it as we extrude it, and we create peanuts, and those peanuts get layered onto paper. And depending on, and I'm massively simplifying it now, but depending on the speed at which you're running the paper through the machine, so we create like a sandwich, and then we cut that into big sheets, and those sheets then get moved across the production line, and we cut them into different widths at the end of the day, and different lengths, and it's those three panels that then get wrapped in paper. So if you saw a Climasol product, you'll see it's sort of a folded thing. It ends up a bit like this. We call it the A and B panel, which you would know they go into a box, so you can completely your bottom side, top, and then the other three sides you completely enclose the the perishable goods that are inside the box. And so that's used for food and beverage mostly. Could be frozen foods, chilled, meal kits, ready to eat. Can be specialty beverages, like anything that needs to be kept cold and below a certain temperature. Otherwise, it has to be thrown away. And it needs to be such that it has to withstand delivery. And so deliveries, they're not taking that box and holding it perfectly like this. Do you know what I mean? It gets thrown around and dropped and whatever.
You wish they were.
Yeah, you wish they were. But so we have to make sure that everything we do can pass all those tests, all those temperature profiles. With one of our bigger customers, we have 48 different profiles, temperature profiles we have to pass. So it's amazing, actually. Talk about the complexity that we were talking about earlier. The winter, so the panels, summer, super summer. So the demand is obviously very seasonal for us to some extent, because in the hotter months is when these products are really required, because of course it's harder to keep everything cold. But we've just launched a thinner version of the climate cell, which will be used this coming winter. So we've actually now working to give ourselves a more level loaded opportunity for the production. And then we do a little bit of that same product goes into life science, so pharmaceutical. Green cell foam is very interesting, a little bit different. So starch based again, extruded, but not cut into small peanuts. It actually forms almost like a corrugated panel. So if you think about it like this, and we can double, triple, we can stack those up to create different widths. It overlaps to some extent because there are some, it also plays in food and beverage, plays in life science really, really well. If you think of life science coolers and how you want to put foam inserts around into a cooler, it does that really, really well. It's interesting because it also does protective quite well. Green cell foam, because of the nature of how it's made, does things like wine shipping really well. You can cut it and kit it and do all those things. So we're finding that we can sort of now we've got product roadmaps, and we're finding that hey, we can sort of adapt a little bit of our recipes and our approach to sort of, let's say, delineate these products a little bit more in the end markets. And that's, I would say, that's something that we're in the midst of now. Is like, hey, we don't want to overlap too much. We can start to delineate, and they can really become strong in the end markets. And my instinct could be right, could be wrong, by the way, but my instinct is I think that green cell foam is going to play very, very well in life science and very well in more specialty kitting and wine and things like that. It has a smaller production footprint, so it's a lot more. We're able to sort of, I would say, set it up in different places in an easier way. Now, Wavecraft, different again. Wavecraft, no starch foam, all paper. And we feed the paper in. Same thing, you've got a top and a bottom, which just sort of create the panel. But inside is almost like, think of a gamma symbol. We've got paper doing this inside. And what's really clever with the machine is you can run it at different speeds, and you can basically put more or less fill. So we can make it thicker or thinner, and we can change the properties of that panel. Some are really almost very strong. You can hardly move them because there's so much paper in there. Or you can make it really thin and almost like a protective layer. So its application base is quite broad. But the fundamental difference really is this notion of the Wavecraft machine. So we've developed and designed, and we built the machine and the panel. So it's two products really at the end of the day. And we're shipping really the Wavecraft as an equipment as a service model. And the whole point is it goes to the point of use and it's on demand. So now you've got a very different situation where I can be at a fulfillment center and I can specifically customize and make exactly what I need in that moment. And I'm not shipping those panels to that location. I'm just making it on demand as I need it. Of course, it lends itself very well to expansion, especially internationally, because we can move that literally anywhere. It's sized so it can be put even air freight, right? So it's so it has a lot of potential. I've worked, again, like hats off to the guys, because I've seen big companies struggle with new product development, and I've been amazed at conceptually They came up with the concept, they designed it and built it, and they branded it. They've done everything, and it's good. It's like a really high quality machine. It's linked to the cloud, so we can monitor it. We can do remote monitoring diagnostics. We understand what's going on. We can support remotely. We can dispatch technicians if needed. So it's a very clever product. And with that one, we've got there are some other adjacent spaces in food and beverage, areas that we don't really serve today with Climacell and Green Sofoam, where it feels like it plays really well. So yeah, three products that complement, and the game at the moment for us is delineate, like don't overlap too much, make sure they have the right end markets. Customers always choose. And the other thing I should mention with the green cell foam is actually it dissolves underwater. It's crazy. It's compostable. It's certified for industrial compostability. Residential, we're looking at and certifying at the moment. But also, if you run it under a tap, it just turns into like a white starchy foam and then just disappears, which some people love.
That's
like some
amazing.
of the customers love it. Yeah.
No, it's again so many thoughts as you speak.
Mm.
So again, coming from this deep love for products, I remember sitting in front of a customer, and we were so proud as paper makers. We had this sample set which was, that thick, like half an inch, and the customer would flip through it, and I could see their eyes sort of glassing over. It was just like, and we were so proud, this is for this application and this application, and you can use this and this. And literally, it happened to me so many times that took me time to understand what was going on. And the customer would eventually put that booklet away and said, "I'll let you know." Basically
Mm-hmm.
because we were confusing them so much. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
so good to delineate the product lines and be clear. This is for this application and this is
Yeah.
for this. Do not, and I still struggle with it because we are just so happy and excited about what we create that we want to show everything.
Yeah.
It totally
Yeah.
confuses the customer, and all it does is delays your order or takes that order away.
Yeah.
So it's so
I agree.
smart to be able to separate that. One of the questions that I had on especially because this is such a different and very interesting model on the Wavecraft, where you've said that you're going to supply the machine and it can be done on site, and it's so many benefits for the customer from that standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
because they can buy big quantities of paper in rolls and they can run
Mm-hmm.
those, and the inventory carrying is much lower. You're not shipping air, at least one
Yeah.
way input
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
material.
Yeah.
So it's so smart, but how do you monetize them? Do you just monetize by the machine? Or because the paper supply you won't be adding any value on the paper supply, or it's the coated paper.
Yeah, it's paper comes from
Okay,
us
go
too.
ahead.
Yeah. So the paper comes from us
Ah,
too. And yeah, it does. It has to be a specific paper because otherwise the panel, when you wrap it and seal it, it won't seal, right? So you need to have the right properties on the paper, the right weight, and then we know, like with the machine, we know how much is being run and how much it's producing, and so it's equipment as a service with the sort of basic premise is I pay a fee for the machine. With that fee, I get a certain amount of paper. I get 24/7 remote monitoring diagnostic support. I get technicians dispatched. We're having to think and evolve that as we do it, because the reality is for some customers, all the positives are obvious, right? In terms of their, hey, on demand, I don't have to go, I don't have to ship it all and try to project what I might need. And that makes sense. But also, it's just not what they do. If you're a fulfillment center, you don't produce panels for insulation. Right? It's not what you do. You work with other companies
yep.
that do that. And so for many customers, they don't want that in their center. They might want it nearby at a sort of existing kitting, cardboard box supply or whatever, or what we might call a microsite. Or if they do have room on their site, they really want you to run it. And so we're having to sort of say, yeah, okay, and then we'll staff it, we'll run it, we'll take care of the paper. They don't want to do the planning and thinking about how much paper do I need for the next, X days for this planned production or whatever. So there's a lot of connection points around planning and production and running that we're finding not all customers want the same thing, and we have to be able to customize and flex our model to support. And then ultimately, yeah, we want to make sure that it's complementary to everything else we do. And I think what we're beginning to realize is lots of people have peak demand. So it's an interesting situation where for some customers at the moment, we're running Climacell as the main product because they love it and it does such a good job. And then they want the Wavecraft for the little peaks of like, then if I have that and I have a peak, I don't have to stress about ordering 4 weeks in advance what I think I might need when I don't even really know what the weather is going to be and what my consumer orders will be. So if I can layer a sort of base load and then have Wavecraft to do these little peaks to help supplement, that's a pretty good combination. So we're looking at that at the moment as well. And then, as I said, last mile, I think is a really interesting space that we think could be really big. And so we'd like to be a big part of that.
And it's an interesting challenge to solve. And of course, from my entrepreneurial brain, what is coming is that, if there is a model to set up contractors where they are nearer to the site, because you also generate more business in terms of it's like we have distributors, but there are these contractors. Because I think, again, the space we come from in industry, you have to sweat the asset. You can't just be there for the peak demand. You want to
Yeah,
have the
yeah,
machine ideally
yeah,
run 24/7, 365 days a year, because otherwise
yeah.
you're just wasting space. So if we get if you, because it's an interesting business model to evolve, because if you get a contractor who who basically earns on the amount they produce, then what is happening is that Temperpack benefits because there is more supply and more running. The customer always has a supplier right nearby.
Mm-hmm.
There is less
Mm-hmm.
transportation, and the contractor has is an extended marketing arm where they are
Mm.
looking at other possibilities, and in a way, I'm sure you're thinking about many of these things, but in a way,
Mm.
multiple people can benefit through that process, and more business can be generated, and of course it ends up
Yeah.
expanding the material and awareness about the material as well, because there is an incentive for the contractor to do marketing for you in a way, because
Mm-hmm.
they will sell more. So
Yeah.
so so I'm sure you're thinking about it, but it'll
Yeah.
be an interesting. I'm just thinking that this is an interesting model to propagate as you have kind of
It is.
distributed
Yeah.
production systems. Yeah, so just something
Yeah.
to think about
Oh,
in
for
that
sure.
domain.
Yeah,
Uh,
what you're touching on, channel management at the end of the day,
yeah,
and so there is for sure. A lot of our customers, of course, we're supporting directly to a lot of the big food and beverage companies, but equally with many of them, we're also working with channel partners because they have other companies that support them for cooling gel or boxes or whatever, and so they want that sort of full capability set. And obviously we're focused. We don't want to be in these sort of all these other areas that's markets that are well served already. So channel management is an area that it's complex, and we definitely have some complexities already in our business today of sometimes how you manage a channel and a direct conversation with a customer, and sometimes you can get a bit caught between the two. And so that can be interesting. And then in life science, we think there's huge opportunities there to do more. Tough space to get into, but once you're in, you're in. But again, like displacement of plastics is a huge opportunity for everybody really there. So we're very keen on that. But that's a very channel dominated market, and so we're having to sort of work a lot there with the different partners potentially. Sometimes those partners might even be competing with each other on the same opportunity. So it can get very complicated, and we'll see. I think we've got things to learn as we grow in these other markets. But channels, yeah, to your point, it can be great. It can be a great way to go to market. Yeah.
yeah, and keeps your mind agile and thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, the channel we had some really interesting experiences, and our sales head keeps reminding me of these because these are some of the idiosyncrasies that I did, where again there was a big customer, and we knew we were supplying the majority of the material, but the customer didn't know that because the channel didn't want them to know. So we
Ah,
said, why are we doing this? The customers must know.
that every
Uh-huh.
channel of theirs is using our product, but
Uh-huh.
they don't know about it. So why don't we simplify and then they can specify? So we went direct, and that was just caused mayhem
Uh-huh.
because one, the final customer understood that they were not negotiating for 100 tons but 500 tons, so they got our price down. The second, the
Mm.
channel was doing their own costing and benefit analysis, and they realized now that I've gone direct, the customer knows the prices, and they just started rejecting the material. And the same material which was working, you can't
Ah,
defy the channel in
yeah.
the end. it's
Yeah.
it's you have to
Yeah.
understand how the business dynamics work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And from there on, we never defied the channel. We always went with them if we had to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, even last night I was having a discussion with our sales head, and he was just like, "You remember that? What you did then?" I was like, "I agree. I will not do that
You're like,
again."
how could I forget?
How can I forget? Yeah, so just taking a little bit of a left turn. So of course I understand the synchronicity between the products. Temperpack also took this call of acquiring KTM
Yeah.
Industries Green Cell,
Yeah.
and was that just because of complementarity, and how did that come about? Because it's still kind of ramping up. Temperpack is still ramping up their own show.
Yeah.
How did that
Yeah.
happen, and why? What was it
Yeah.
that instigated that acquisition?
Yeah. So, well, again, before my time, right? So it sort of wasn't part of the discussions, but I would characterize it as partly looking for scale. So I think we're, we are obviously a company that has scale today, and part of that I think was what the journey that climates have been on already, but obviously green cell foam was really a yeah another major player in the space, and they were known, but also complementary in the sense that some of the channels and the end markets, there's complementary elements there. Supply chain is complementary elements there as well in terms of materials. When you think about engineering, process engineering, material science, packaging engineering, same. So when you think about synergies of across the business, really good. And then from a location standpoint, uh, we're in Richmond, so East Coast is well covered from Richmond. We have Las Vegas also with Climacell, so that sort of picks up West Coast. Um, the KTM facilities, they actually had two. They had one in Reno, but that was a bit of an overlap really in Nevada. And then they had one in Michigan. So what we've ended up doing is retaining Michigan. And so now we have three locations. So we've got pretty good coverage. Obviously, they're producing some different products. But I think overall, you get scale with revenue and profitability and all of this sort of the flow through of if I'm driving cost out on a supply chain, I can play with that in all three locations, right? And if I'm thinking about how to evolve the machines and maintenance excellence and how do we track and how do all of those things play across all locations. And the operations leader that works for me covers all three locations. The
Yeah,
sales
yeah,
leader, the chief growth officer that works for me is selling everything.
yeah.
So it's
All of
sort of
that.
another
Yeah,
part of their portfolio, really. Yeah. So,
yeah,
and I think it's worked well. It's a different product. For me, it just goes back to the conversation we were having a little bit earlier that there are some really interesting attributes about the products, and they lend themselves really well in different end markets. And for me, it's that really emphasizing that and making sure that they have their own space and journey and position ultimately. Yeah.
yeah. And I think the synchronicity seems obvious. And taking that a little bit further, you mentioned earlier that Green Cell's foam is compostable,
Mm.
and all the products that Temperpack has been making are recyclable. And
Mm.
I had a little discussion with Joe, and he was very excited. I said, maybe we should change the coating on the Wavecraft and make it both. Why do you want to have it either
Yeah.
or? And he was very excited. And I said, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure there is a cost-effective solution where we can create an agri-based paper and a coating to give both of that. So you have multiple benefits where it's a renewable source of
Yeah.
material. You have a coating which is not just recyclable but compostable and maybe even in water dissolves.
Yeah.
And then of course, it's recyclable in the paper
Yeah.
stream, which is an
Yes.
absolute benefit, because paper will get recycled 70, eighty
Yes.
percent compared to 7, 8% for polymers.
Yeah.
Um, so that was really interesting. So how are
Yeah.
you guys thinking about it in terms of, well, green cell is already compostable, but getting the other two products also have both those
Yeah.
attributes,
Yeah.
compostability and
Yeah.
recyclability in the paper stream. Are you? I'm sure you are. And so how are you
Yeah.
thinking about progressing in that direction?
Yeah. We're in the process of looking at the compostability certification on Climacell. But we spent quite a bit of time, uh, sort of third quarter of last year, looking at our product roadmaps. And again, this is where I think you get the benefits of of a group looking across three product lines, because the same things apply, right? What's the journey you want to take the material on? What's the journey you want to take the cost inputs on? The machinery, the automation, all of these things that we're doing. And so we have very clear goals, looking at paper source, looking at coatings, and ultimately have this obviously this goal that we get to a point where we make everything as recyclable, compostable, and straightforward as possible. So that's all part of our product roadmap. Um, but at the end of the day, everything has to come back to the thing we talked about at the beginning, which the technical quality of the product has to be, in our view, the best. The quality of the product and the consumer experience has to be the best, right? So we have to pass all of those things: reliability of supply, cost position, sustainability. So we're mindful of those. But yes, we have very clear stage gates this year, actually, of changes we're going to be looking at on sources and coatings and things like that, aqueous based and so forth.
Yep.
To your point,
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
super. That's great to hear. Um,
mm,
and if you look at the way Temperpack has grown, it has meant significant raising of funds and being able to
mm,
deploy them well, because
yeah,
there is a whole challenge of raising
yeah,
money and then effectively
yeah,
deploying it. Talk to us a little more about. I know that it's a little before your time, but I'm sure you know a little bit of the
mm,
story there. How did that happen? And did you manage to find, I'm sure you managed to find the right investors and bring them
mm,
on board. And of
yeah,
course, you have deployed it effectively. So
yeah,
just the journey of funding and the efficacy that emerged there.
yeah. So we have a group of investors that have been, I would say, involved from the very beginning, that have stayed in subsequent rounds, and obviously some of them come in a bit later, and it's an interesting mix. You've got some very storied, well known VCs that have got founders that are brand names. They're just super well known people. We've got a family office that is representing money from the UK, from um, yeah, a very well known family in the UK. And then we've got funds that are quite stored in green investment, that have been in green investment, and they're what sort of companies that have done, unlike many, very well. They've done a really good job at it over the years. And then the more recent, of course, we've got very large, very well known uh, company, Goldman, right? So between those, you've got Goldman, Grosvenor, Revolution, SJF, Harbert. So it's just a really good, interesting mix, all still very active and supportive. And so we're at a point, of course, where we don't need to do more raises. It's really at this point about uh, generation of cash and deployment of cash on top of the cash that we still have to deploy. We're uh, very focused on being smart with the cash that we have. Obviously, recognizing that we can use some cash this year to make some smart investments, and we will. Um, and we're really testing at the moment where that cash goes. But I think we've got super support uh, from the investors that are there. As I said earlier, they interact really well, and complement each other really well. So how the process went down, I don't know. They've done 4 rounds, of course, and a bit of seed funding before that. But uh, I think obviously we fit really well into the funds that have invested in us. And they seem at the moment very happy with what we're doing. 23 was a good year for us. 24 looks like a really good step change as well. And then we'll see where things go from there. People are always asking me like, what's next? And I'm like, well, investors are in the business of growing companies and selling them. So that's just a given. You just can't predict what that looks like because nobody controls it at the end of the day. The only thing we can control is build a great company. Build a great company that's delivering really, really well in its chosen space or spaces, and that has great growth, ongoing growth, and everything else looks after itself at the end of the day. So that's the goal. Yeah.
That's beautifully put, and I'm going to pivot on another angle, which is so important for organizations, and clearly Temperpack seems to be paying a lot of attention there, which is the culture aspect. And I read it through your website and other places, and of course, you've also been rated as the best startup employer and that sort of thing. So, talk to us a little more about the culture building aspect and how has Temperpack differentiated itself? I know that diversity is an important part of the organization, and
Yeah,
there's a certain bonhomie within the team. And you talked
there
about
is.
it a little,
There
inferred
is.
on it a little bit when you were
Yeah.
talking about you joining the team, the company. So it'll be great to hear from you
Yeah.
about the culture building and how important that has been in the organization.
Yeah. It's really interesting situation, I think, and it's a great question. So gosh, there's so many things to think about with that. So on the one of the things I noticed when I joined, of course, and you often see this with companies that have been through that startup journey, been through some tough times, come out of those, and have sort of turned the corner on profitability. It's quite a journey to go through, right? And it does drive a lot of camaraderie. There's a very strong collegiate spirit, and there's a lot of really talented people that have been a major part of the journey. And so you definitely feel that. So that one there for sure, and I think it just comes through the journey that they've shared together. The cultural element that I've also found very interesting is the values they created. Because when I remember looking at them, obviously a bit like you, I was researching and I was going for my interviews, so I better understand the values. And what I noticed about the values was that when you read into the detail, the values were things that I'd heard many times before, really, like integrity and quality. And so all of those elements that were in there. But what was really different about them was what they called them, right? Shoot for the moon and land there, right? Love the process.
Nice. Love it.
Do it, right? Do it together and be the most respected. So they're not dry integrity. They're not dry, like one word. They're phrases that mean something. And I think they're phenomenal. Like I really love the values because I think they speak to the spirit of the company so well. And actually, one of the things that we've talked a lot about this year with the leadership team is how do we bring them alive even more, right? Because I said they're there and they're great, but how do we re-emphasize them all the time in what we do to celebrate them and to lean into them? And I think even like shoot for the moon and land there, I've been using it quite a lot recently because we're at this point of, have you heard of the phrase genius of the and? It was a Jim Collins phrase where he was looking at successful companies and saying they can hold sometimes things that appear to be opposed and they can hold them in the same space and make both true. That's a little bit
Tell me a little more about this because I'm a big Jim Collins fan, but that doesn't ring a bell. So go
okay.
ahead, and I'm sure everybody else would be interested as
Yeah,
well.
so I'll characterize it in a way of what I think it means for us right now as a company. But on the one hand, we've been laser focused. We're in a very good position, but we have to keep doing more, meaning consolidate, perfect and consolidate what you are. And so if we think of animals, I said to the team, that's the goat, greatest of all time, right? That's the goat. Like we want to be the goat, like the best insulation, sustainable insulation company we can be. We reduce impact. We provide more access to food and medicine for people. All of those things, right? Great service to our customers. Be the goat. On the other hand, we want to invest in new growth. So that can feel like, well, if I'm investing in new growth, does that distract me from being consolidating and perfecting? And so I've got two, what may feel like they conflict. But the point I'm making to the team is like, but it is right? For us right now in our journey, it is we have to be a goat and we have to become a unicorn, just to use the sort of phrases that are out there. And so the job for me and my team, I think, is how do we hold those both in the same environment, learn how to prioritize, make smart choices. There will be trades, right? But you're walking that line between those two things. And that was the Jim Collins, like the genius of the and was that great companies figure out how to hold these two seemingly opposite things true, and they live alongside each other, and you figure out how to deliver on both. And that's part of our challenge right now. And it's true for the culture. It's true for because we're transitioning. We're investing more in systems and process and things that sit underneath that allow us to keep going. And we're bringing new people in. We've got a lot of great people that have been there for a long time, but I'm one of those people that if you're new or old, you're all the same to me, in the sense that I respect you both, right? You've been here a long time. You've delivered great things. You're new. You could have gone anywhere, but you came here. So you're equally important. And we have to learn how to make all of that relevant and true, and not lose the great things that are there, but build on them. So it's a very interesting time for the company, and it's part of what makes the job fascinating and challenging right at the end of the day. So yeah, that's it is a great culture, but we're building on it, right? We got to build on it and not just let it sit there. Yeah.
I hope you're aware that you give a lot of gold nuggets as you speak. I keep thinking, well, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
I'm sure
Thank
people
you.
have told you that before, but there's a lot of things that make you think. And initially I heard "and" instead of "and." So I was like,
okay.
oh, genius of that. What was that?
Yeah,
Where did Jim
yeah,
Collins say that? But that's
yeah.
interesting also because I think two analogies that came from my wife actually. And she always talks about the and not the or. So it's very interesting, and she'll bring it up. I believe in the and. Why should we only do this? We can do this
Yeah,
and this.
yeah,
How do we do this? And
yeah.
the other one which came to me was when you were talking about the values, and we were just last week we were discussing, and my wife guides a lot of the brand that we are creating, and we were talking about making T-shirts for each of the values, and we were like, we can't have it boring. It cannot just be diversity or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. How do you make it more spunky so that anybody who's wearing it is uplifted?
yeah,
And then again, similar to what Temperpack has
yeah.
done, and yeah, just an
They
analogy of
and
something
bet
that
the
came to
people
my mind.
wear they've done the similar thing. They have T-shirts and people love them. The team love them.
Hmm.
I see them wearing them all the
Amazing,
time.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
is really nice, right? There's a real connection with the brand, which is great. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to take this towards a closure because all good
Okay.
things have to come to an end. So two last questions. So of course,
Yeah.
there will be a Peter effect that will come into Temperpack. So if you look at the Peter
Mm.
effect and
Hmm.
the changes Peter and the team is going to bring, how do you see Temperpack scaling and making a difference, say in the next 5 years? What is your ideal
Mm.
situation that this is where we will be in the next 5 years?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the goat and the unicorn to some extent, right? So
Yeah.
um, we have very specific goals for 24, as you can imagine. I'm a big objectives, key results, person, having cut my teeth on a startup out of Silicon Valley where Klein were there, right, and they were a big part of Google, and OKRs were a big part. So I think they work really well because you can visualize them and drive them. So we're very detailed and we're locked in on that. Um, I'm also a bit of a lean operations proponent. In my last stint at GE, Larry Culp would come in, and Larry is such an amazing lean leader. He's a bit scary actually, but to be honest, if the financial pro forma and any lean tool like Ebola, you can guarantee he's going to pick up the one thing you didn't want him to notice, or ask a question. You go, oh yeah, that's a good question. But anyway, I learned in a couple of years, I saw him deploy that. I learned a lot, and so we're very, very dialed in the first instance around 2024 and what does success look like. So that's very, very clear to us, and we're all motivated around that as well, just in terms of what we'd like to get done, but also the whole bonus pool for the team is all built around the same goals, right? So that's good. And then as part of that, you get aspirational, right? So my aspirationally on scaling, I kind of have this 2x thing in my head, which is, okay, in the next 3 to 5 years, let's just be 2x. 2x the revenue, 2x the profit, 2x the cash generation, just 2x, 2x, 2x. And then people are like, but how? It's like, fuck, that we'll figure that out. That's where we want to go. And so that will come from obviously thinking about different regions, different adjacent markets, different things. And we've got, I would say, 3 to 4 areas that we're really focused on this year, knowing that I think at the end of the day, it will be highly unlikely that all 3 or 4 will make sense in the end. You hope that maybe a couple of them resonate and work, and then you sort of layer those in. We have, in addition to I would say our sort of our core brands, Wavecraft is still on its journey too, right? And we think that that's a big opportunity for us to sort of accelerate Wavecraft deployment. So 2x is my. I like simple phrases; they're easy to remember.
No, that's a good one. It's clear. Just everything is 2x. I think I remember there was another company in India actually, and the CEO was again very succinct and clear, and he used the term million billion. He said 1,000,000 tons and $1 billion is where I want to be in the next 5 years or something.
Yeah.
But it's simple, this is what we are targeting, million billion.
Yeah.
And they would repeat it again and again.
Yeah.
So it was really nice. I was actually trying to think the guy who wrote this whole OKR thing, and I'm forgetting his name, and the new book that is coming from him. It's Principle or something. I'll send it to you. But it seems really interesting, this whole thing where he's, again, used a lot of, I just listening to another podcast where he talked about it, and it was very interesting. I'm sure you will find it fascinating with your clarity on OKRs. And that takes me, of course, anything else that you want to add, please do. But it takes me to my final question also. What is good garbage to you?
Yeah, then I think at the end of the day, good garbage has to be no garbage, really, right? Ultimately, and so. And we talked about this at the beginning as well. I when you reflect on our world and our economy and how much of it is driven by moving goods and people around, and all of the waste streams that come from that, I think ultimately that cannot be garbage, right? We have to figure out, and we know we're so clever. Do you know what I mean? We have so much technology, so much capability. So I think ultimately good garbage is when there isn't any, and waste streams are not really waste streams. They're streams that go into other things and get repurposed, reused, recycled, however you want to think about it. But I am sure that when we put our minds to it, there is no reason for a circular economy to not be real and simple at the end of the day. Like, people need to, in order for it to happen, it has to be easy, right? I think we just have to recognize that we're, as human beings, we're often a bit lazy, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's in order for people to want to do something, it has to be easy and there has to be some benefit there. But yeah, so for me, good garbage is no garbage.
Thank you so much. That was well put. And Peter, it's been such a joy speaking to you. I think our industry is richer by having you in it. Thank you for joining it. And I'm sure we will see big changes coming and, big impacts happening with Temperpack and its growth, and you at the helm leading it. Thank you so much for joining me and having this conversation, and for your time.
Ed, you're really welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And it's been a real pleasure to meet you and talk to you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.